The automatic doors at the oncology wing of St. Clement's slid open at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning in March, and the sound they made, that soft mechanical exhale, became, over the course of 11 months, one of the most familiar sounds in my life. More familiar than my own apartment door. More familiar than the particular creak of my mother's recliner or the sound of her cough in the night when I was sleeping on her couch. I knew those doors. I knew the particular smell of the corridor beyond them, antiseptic and something floral that I always thought was probably a diffuser someone had plugged in near the reception desk. I knew which of the parking spaces filled up first on a Tuesday. I knew that if we arrived before 8:30, we got a spot near the elevator, and my mother did not have to walk the long stretch of cold pavement in November with her coat pulled tight and her breath coming short. I knew all of that. I had learned all of that. My name is Wren Halloway, and I am 22 years old, and I am telling you this so you understand that what happened in that corridor in March was not a surprise to me. Not really. The only thing that surprised me was my own voice. 5 words. I had practiced them in my car, in the parking lot of this exact building for 16 weeks, and when the moment came and the words came out, they were quieter than I expected. Steadier. I picked up my coat. I said what I said. And I walked out through those doors into the rain. My mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, stage 2, caught on what her doctor called a lucky scan, in the spring of the year I turned 21. I was in my second year of nursing school at Columbus State. I was working 22 hours a week as a home health aide for an elderly man named Mr. Gerald Fitch on Collinwood Road, helping him manage his medications and his Tuesday grocery runs, and the particular stubbornness he felt about answering his own front door. I liked Mr. Fitch. I liked the work. I was tired all the time in the way that nursing students are tired, a specific, background hum of tired that you stop noticing after the first semester, the way you stop hearing traffic once you've lived on a busy street long enough. Then my mother called. I want to be precise about what the next 11 months actually looked like because I think sometimes the story gets simplified in the retelling, mine included. My mother lived 40 minutes south of Columbus, in a house my parents had bought the year before my father left. He had been gone for 6 years by then. He was not a presence in this part of our lives. My sister Petra was 29, lived 20 minutes from my mother, worked remotely as a project coordinator for a logistics company, and had a schedule that, by her own description to anyone who asked, was extremely flexible. In 11 months, Petra drove our mother to 2 appointments. One of them was the initial oncology consult, when we were all still in the sharp phase of the diagnosis, when it was new and frightening enough that everyone showed up, everyone was present, everyone sent the text that said, "Let me know what you need." The second time was a follow-up in August that Petra later described to our aunt as a harrowing day, a phrase I heard repeated back to me by my aunt in September, as if it were a reasonable thing to say about a Tuesday afternoon in which Petra sat in a waiting room chair for 90 minutes and read a magazine. I drove my mother to 11 appointments that year. I filled out 17 insurance pre-authorization forms, most of them at 11 o'clock at night on my laptop at my mother's kitchen table with a copper kettle on the stove and the Earl Grey my mother insisted on making for me, even when I told her to rest. I learned the names of every nurse on the 4th floor. I learned which radiologist ran behind and which one was always exactly on time, and I built the Tuesday schedule around that knowledge. I reduced my hours with Mr. Fitch to 14 a week, which cost me $197.40 every 2 weeks, money I did not have a smooth plan for at the time. I deferred 1 nursing school elective. I bought a weekly planner, a small leather-bound one from the drugstore, the kind with a brass clasp, and I filled it in pencil, so I could rub things out and move them. That was my year. That was what the year was made of. Petra called our mother every few days. She sent flowers twice. In October, she told our mother that she was finding the whole situation very emotionally heavy and that she had started seeing a therapist to deal with the stress. I remember my mother telling me that on the phone, and my mother's voice being careful, the way a mother's voice gets careful when she is monitoring your reaction. I said that was good. I meant it, mostly. I think about Petra the way you think about a person once you understand something fundamental about them that they don't know you understand. She is not a bad person. She has never been a bad person. What Petra is, what I came to understand slowly, across many Tuesday afternoons driving south on I-270, is a person who was never made to be uncomfortable in our family. She was the eldest. She was the one our mother called capable and responsible and the steady one, which are nice words that quietly assigned her a different kind of pressure than the ones she put on me. Where Petra was capable, I was sensitive. Where she was steady, I was too emotional, too much. I think our mother did not mean it as a wound. I think it was one anyway. I think Petra learned, somewhere in the long years of growing up in that house, that she would be praised for the right feelings and gently managed when she had the wrong ones. And so she learned to have the right ones. And so she learned, eventually, that she could not really tolerate the sight of someone else having the wrong ones and not being managed back into line. That is what I mean when I say her cruelty came from a wound. I don't say it to excuse her. I say it because understanding it was the first thing Dr. Renata Facolo asked me to do, and I was bad at it for the first 6 weeks, and then I was better. The inciting incident, a phrase Dr. Acolo used and that I borrowed because it was more useful than just saying the day everything broke, happened on a Sunday in January. Not at the hospital. At my mother's house, on an afternoon visit when Petra had driven down and I had driven down, and we were both in the kitchen while my mother rested in the living room. I was washing dishes. Petra was sitting at the table. She was on her phone for most of it. Which was fine, I wasn't keeping score. Then she put her phone down and said that she had been talking to Aunt Gloria, and that Aunt Gloria had noticed that I seemed stressed, and that my stress was affecting Mom. I turned off the tap. I did not turn around. Petra said that everyone was worried about me. She said I had made myself the center of the situation. She said that Mom did not need a martyr. She needed calm, and that I was not providing calm. She said that my way of being in this, she used those words, my way of being in this, was making it harder for the whole family. I dried my hands on the dish towel that had been hanging on the oven handle since before I was born. It had a pattern of small yellow lemons on it. One of the lemons near the bottom had faded to almost white. I said, "Okay." I left the kitchen. I sat in my car in my mother's driveway for 38 minutes. It was 4:11 in the afternoon. There was ice on the windshield from the morning that I hadn't fully cleared. I looked at the strip of clouded glass at the bottom, and I thought about all the things I wanted to say, and I said none of them, and then I drove home. The next morning I called Dr. Renata Acola's office and made the appointment I had been putting off for 3 months. The 16 weeks between that Sunday in January and the Tuesday in March were not a straight line. Nothing about that period was a straight line. Dr. Acolo saw me on Wednesdays at 5:30, after my last nursing class, before I drove down to my mother's for the Thursday appointment. We sat in her small office on the 4th floor of a building on High Street with a framed print of Lake Erie on the wall and a small white noise machine outside the door that I could hear faintly if the room got too quiet. We talked about the dishes. We talked about the lemon towel. We talked about what Petra had said and the specific way I had absorbed it, not as an attack but as a verdict, which is what I always did, had always done, had been trained to do in the architecture of our family. I had a specific internal mechanism for turning criticism into confirmation. Someone says you're making this about yourself, and the mechanism takes it in and says, "Yes, you are, you always do, they are right." Dr. Acolo called this a learned response. She said it was very old. She said it probably predated Petra by a decade. I am not going to describe all 16 sessions. I'm not sure I could. What I can tell you is what I took out of them, which was one thing, more or less. One operational thing. That I was allowed to decline the verdict. That I did not have to accept it just because someone handed it to me. That there was a way to say, so that was not a fight, not a scene, not proof of everything they had always said about me. That it could be small. That it could be 5 words. That the power of those 5 words was not in their volume or their elegance, but in what they were attached to, which was everything I had already quietly done, everything that was already in motion, everything that did not require Petra's understanding to be real. In week 12, I called a documentation practice Dr. Acolo had referred me to and authorized the formal release of a summary of my therapeutic work to my mother's primary care physician. Not the details. A summary. A professional document that stated, in clear clinical language, that I had been in active therapeutic support since January, that I had been a primary caregiver since April of the prior year, and that I had sought this documentation voluntarily, proactively, and without precipitating crisis. Dr. Acolo wrote the summary herself. I'm going to tell you something about the weeks before I did that. Because I think people sometimes hear pre-prepared consequence and imagine a cold, calculated person. Someone who is always 3 steps ahead. Someone who had a plan and executed it without feeling. Someone who did not lie in bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and wonder if she was making a catastrophic mistake. The Thursday before I filed the authorization paperwork, the night of March 6th, I was in the parking lot of St. Clement's in my Honda Civic, the one my father had bought used in 2015 and signed over to me when he moved to Cincinnati, and felt briefly responsible. It was 9:22 p.m. I had just come from dropping my mother home after a late-running scan. The scan had gone fine. The numbers were holding. I should have felt good. I sat in that parking lot for 41 minutes. I had my phone in my hand and Dr. Acolo's number on the screen, and I did not call her. I kept almost calling her. I kept thinking that maybe I was making a mistake, that the paperwork was too much, that it was, and this was the word that kept surfacing, dramatic. That Petra would be proven right. That the whole family would look at the documentation and see not a caregiver protecting herself, but a person making herself the center of a situation, just like Petra had said. Just like Petra was always saying. I sat with that. I turned it over. Outside the car. The parking lot lights had come on, and the lot was almost empty, and there was a thin mist coming off the pavement from where the day's warmth was meeting the night's cold. I thought about the copper kettle. I thought about the leather planner with the brass clasp, the pages of penciled appointments that I had rubbed out and rewritten across 11 months. I thought about Mr. Fitch on Collinwood Road, and the $197.40, and the Tuesdays, and the 17 insurance forms filled out at 11 at night with my mother's kitchen light over my shoulder. And I thought, I am not making myself the center. I am making myself real. I put my phone in my purse. I drove home. The next morning, I filed the authorization. Some kindnesses are loans the lender forgets they're keeping. The day in March arrived the way those days always do, ordinary at first. We left my mother's house at 8:21. We got the parking spot near the elevator. I had her chart notes in a manila folder in my bag. We checked in at 8:39. The waiting room had the same fake ficus it always had, and I sat in the same chair near the window, and I looked at my phone and did not see what I was looking at. My sister arrived at 9:04. She had told my mother the night before that she might stop in, which was how Petra did things, so that if she didn't come, she had not broken a promise, and if she did come, she received the full credit of having shown up. She came in with a coffee and a tote bag and kissed our mother's cheek and sat down, and the 3 of us were together in the waiting room for the first time in months. Our mother was called in for her scan at 9:18. Petra and I were left in the waiting room. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. I was looking at the ficus. I was thinking about nothing in particular or trying to. Then Petra said she needed to talk to me. She stood up and gestured toward the side corridor near the drinking fountain, away from the other patients, and I followed because the alternative was refusing, which I had never learned how to do gracefully in small spaces. We stood in the corridor near a low bench and a poster about early detection. 2 nurses at the station nearby had their backs to us. They could hear if they were listening. Petra said my name. She said it the way she used to say it when we were children, and she had decided something was my fault. The weight of that history, of 22 years of being named that way, sat briefly across my shoulders, and then I set it down. Wren, she said. You make everything about you. You are destroying this family. I want to tell you that I felt nothing. I want to tell you it was easy. It was not easy. It was the specific kind of not easy that had a shape I recognized, the old familiar contraction, the impulse to apologize, to make it smaller, to begin constructing the explanation that would satisfy her, to find the wording that might allow both of us to walk away without damage. I had been doing that my whole life. I knew the motions of it the way I knew the drive to St. Clement's. I did not do the motions. I had heard these words before. Not exactly, not word for word, but in their structure, their logic, their verdict shape. I had absorbed them in various forms for 22 years. Wren is too sensitive. Wren overreacts. Wren makes it worse. The specific, grinding grammar of being the person in a family who is always told that her feelings are the real problem. I picked up my coat from the bench where I had laid it. I had practiced 5 words for 16 weeks. In my car. In my apartment. In the shower at 6:15 in the morning before nursing class. In the parking lot of this exact hospital on the night of March 6th, alone and almost calling someone and deciding not to. I had said them until they were flat, until they had no tremor in them, until they were just words, true words, words I had the right to say. I don't accept that. I put on my coat. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at her face for her reaction because her reaction was not the point, had never been the point. I walked past the nurse's station. The automatic doors at the end of the corridor slid open. I stepped through them into the rain. I did not look back. I did not run. I walked to my car and I got in and I put my hands on the wheel and I sat there for exactly 90 seconds because that was what Dr. Okolo had told me to do. Just 90 seconds, just let the body come down, and then I drove. Petra called 7 times before I reached the freeway. I know this because I watched the calls come in on my phone on the passenger seat. I did not pick up. I was not ready to pick up. I had done the thing that was mine to do, and now I was driving home on the freeway in the rain, and the windshield wipers were doing what windshield wipers do, and I was 22 years old, and I had said 5 words, and the world had not ended. I want to describe that drive accurately because I think the temptation, in telling a story like this, is to describe it as triumphant, as a release, as the moment where the music swells and you feel, finally, free. It was not that, exactly. It was quieter than that. It was closer to the feeling you get after a very long physical effort, when the effort is over and your body is still processing what it just did. A kind of flat exhaustion mixed with something underneath that you don't have a word for yet. I thought about my mother in that waiting room. I thought about the nurses whose backs had been turned. I thought about the folder with the chart notes, still in my bag on the passenger seat beside the phone. I thought about the first time I had driven to St. Clement's, almost exactly a year before, when I had barely known where the parking was and I had walked in too fast and gotten turned around in the corridor and had to ask someone at the desk, and I had been frightened in a way I hadn't known how to name at the time. I knew where the parking was now. I knew which spaces filled up first on a Tuesday. My mother called at 10:33. I picked up on the second ring. She said, "Wren, Petra is very upset." I said, "I know, Mom. I'm sorry the timing was hard. I just needed to step out." My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you walked out." I did. Another quiet. Then, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm okay. I'll come back when you're ready to leave. Just call me." I drove to a diner on Broad Street. I ordered coffee. I spread my nursing notes across the table because I had a practicum review in 2 days, and because sitting still without something to do was not something I was able to manage that morning. A woman at the next table had a sleeping toddler across her lap. The windows were fogged from the rain outside. I sat there for an hour and 20 minutes and I drank my coffee, and I read the same page of my notes 3 times, and I was all right. My mother called me at 11:47. I drove back. I picked her up at the side entrance. Petra had already left. My mother did not ask me what had happened on the drive home. She looked out the window for most of it, and once, somewhere on I-270, she reached over and put her hand on my arm and kept it there without saying anything. I did not say anything either. The rain had lightened to a mist. I took the exit I always took, and I drove the route I always drove, and I pulled into her driveway and helped her carry her bag inside, and made sure she had what she needed for the evening. That night, my mother received a message through her patient portal from her primary care physician's office. It was a notification that a document had been added to her care summary, a letter from Dr. Renata Okolo, summarizing my role as a primary caregiver, my consistent attendance at all 11 oncology appointments to date, my voluntary enrollment in therapeutic support since January, and the professional assessment that I had managed a significant caregiving load with stability and proactive self-awareness. My mother read it that evening. She called me at 9:07 p.m. She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "I didn't want to make it a competition." My mother cried. Not a lot. She is not a person who cries a lot. She said my name once, quietly, and then she said, "I see you, Wren. I need you to know that I see you." I had not known until that moment how much I had needed to hear it. I had thought I was past needing it, that I had moved beyond that particular hunger, that 16 weeks of Wednesdays on High Street had taught me not to need the acknowledgement of people who might not give it.
I was wrong about that.
Or maybe I was right that I no longer needed it to survive, but wrong that I no longer wanted it. Those are different things. Dr. Okolo would probably have something to say about the distinction. I said, "I love you, Mom." She said, "I love you. Come Thursday." I came Thursday, and the Thursday after that. Petra called 2 days after the hospital. She did not call to apologize, exactly. She called to say that she had heard about the doctor's letter and that she felt blindsided and that she wanted to talk. I said that was fine. I said I was available on Saturdays. She said she had a busy Saturday. I said the one after that was fine too. I want to be honest about the weeks that followed. They were not peaceful, exactly. There was a period of about 10 days where I was getting calls I did not pick up and texts I read and did not respond to immediately, and I was aware the whole time of a pressure to resolve it faster, to take the discomfort away from everyone by giving them something that looked like closure. I had done that before. I knew the shape of that impulse well. It showed up disguised as maturity, as being the bigger person, as not wanting to cause any more upset than had already been caused. What it actually was, I had come to understand, was the old trained reflex. Make yourself smaller, smooth it over, get back inside the version of the story where you are the manageable one. I let it sit. I went in my Wednesday with Dr. Okolo, and I told her about the calls and the texts and the pressure, and she asked me how I felt when I didn't pick up. I said I felt like I was doing something wrong. She asked me if I had done something wrong. I sat with that for a moment. I said no. She said, "The discomfort of a new behavior and the guilt of a bad one feel the same at first." I wrote that down in the leather planner, on the blank pages at the back, in pen. Aunt Gloria called on a Wednesday about a week and a half later. She said she had not realized. She said she wished she had known. She said the words carefully in the way that people say careful words when they are not sure if they are being forgiven for something. I told her I wasn't looking for an apology. I told her I just needed the record to be clear. She said she understood. I think she did. Petra and I had our Saturday conversation about 6 weeks after the hospital. It was at my mother's kitchen table, the same table where I had washed the dishes in January. The copper kettle was on the stove. My mother was in the living room with the television on low, and I think she was listening, but I did not mind if she was. It was not the conversation Petra had planned, I think. She had planned something where I would explain myself, and she would explain herself, and we would arrive at something even, a draw, a ceasefire dressed up as resolution. What actually happened was different. I told her what the year had looked like from where I was standing. I did not raise my voice. I did not produce a ledger of grievances. I did not say, "and another thing." I just told her what it had been. I told her what 11 months of Tuesday appointments looked like from the driver's seat. I told her what the January afternoon in this kitchen had done to me, not in a blaming way, but in a precise way, the way you describe a thing that happened so that the other person can see it from the outside.
Petra sat with that.
She did not say she was wrong. She said she didn't know. She said she thought she had been protecting Mom by not adding to the weight of it. I told her that not adding to the weight was different from watching someone else carry it without acknowledgement. She was quiet for a long time after that. Not the performing kind of quiet, the real kind, the kind where a person is actually turning something over and not yet sure what they think. She said, "I think I owe you something I don't know how to give yet." I said, "I know." We did not arrive at warmth. We arrived at something that felt like the beginning of honesty, which is different from warmth but is in some ways harder to find, and I was willing to treat it as enough for now. Enough for now was a phrase Dr. Okolo had offered me, and I had resisted it for weeks, because it sounded like settling. I understood later that it was the opposite. It was a refusal to demand resolution on a timeline that served my anxiety rather than the actual repair. Mr. Fitch turned 83 in April. I brought him a carrot cake from the bakery on 5th, the kind with the cream cheese frosting he always said he didn't want, and then ate 2 slices of. He told me, while he was on the second slice, that I seemed different. Less wound up, was how he put it. I told him I was working on some things. He nodded slowly, the way he nodded when he was deciding whether a subject deserved more words, and then he said, You know what the difference is between people who carry everything and people who don't? The ones who carry everything think they're the only ones strong enough to hold it. The ones who don't have figured out that strength and obligation are two different things. He went back to his cake. He did not look up. I drove home that afternoon thinking about that sentence. I wrote it in the back of the leather planner, on one of the blank pages at the end, in pen instead of pencil because I did not intend to rub it out. I passed my practicum review the following week with scores I was quietly proud of. My supervising instructor, a woman named Janet Sue, who had been teaching nursing students for 19 years and who did not hand out compliments carelessly, told me I had strong instincts for reading a room, for noticing what a patient needed before they said it aloud. I thought about that on the drive home too. I thought about what you learn about rooms when you spend 11 months in corridors. I was on track to graduate the following spring. I had been thinking for a while about oncology nursing, about what it would mean to do professionally. The thing I had been doing personally for 11 months, to be the person in the corridor, who knows which parking spaces fill first on a Tuesday, who knows the radiologist's schedule, who knows how to walk beside someone through the sliding doors without making them feel like a burden. I had not told anyone that yet. It felt too early to say out loud. But I knew it was there, and knowing it was there felt for the first time in a long time like something that belonged entirely to me. I think about what 5 words cost me. Not in damage. I mean in the accumulation of quiet that preceded them. 16 weeks of Wednesdays on High Street. 41 minutes in a hospital parking lot in March with my phone in my hand and the mist coming off the pavement. 22 years of learning to receive verdicts I had not authored. Some kindnesses are loans the lender forgets they're keeping. I kept my mother's appointments. I kept showing up to the nursing program. I kept Mr. Fitch's Tuesdays because I had made a commitment, and also because I liked him, because he was a gruff man with a soft center who once told me, while I was handing him his blood pressure medication, that the most important skill in any relationship was knowing when to be quiet and when to refuse to be. I thought about that sentence for a long time after he said it. A family will tell you blood is thicker than water until the day blood asks them to give something up. I do not think of what I did as revenge.
I want to be clear about that.
The documentation was not a weapon. It was a record. It was me saying, this is real, it happened, here is the evidence that it happened, and I will not argue with anyone about whether it happened. There is a difference between those two things, between punishing someone and simply refusing to disappear. I had been disappearing for most of my life inside my family's story of who I was, and I was 22 years old, and I was done. Love that demands you shrink is not love. It is management. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors. And you get to decide who walks through. I still drive my mother to her appointments. The scans are every 3 months now. The numbers have continued to hold. She has started to make 2 cups of tea in the evening instead of 1, which means she is expecting me to stay, and I usually do. We talk about the nursing program. We talk about Mr. Fitch. She tells me things about her own mother that she never told me before. Small things, quiet things, the kind a person shares when they are finally sure they are being heard. Petra came to the last appointment. She sat in the chair beside me in the waiting room, and she was quiet, and she did not leave early. Afterward, she walked with us to the car, and she carried my mother's bag without being asked. It is not enough, and it is also not nothing, and I have decided I can hold both of those things at once without it breaking anything in me. If someone needs you to lie about who you are so they can feel comfortable, they are not protecting you. They are protecting the story they tell about themselves. Losing an illusion is still better than living inside one. I think about the automatic doors sometimes. That soft mechanical exhale. The smell of the corridor. The fact that I know now which parking spaces fill up first on a Tuesday. I know those doors because I showed up. That is the simplest version of the truth. I showed up 11 times in 11 months, and then I said 5 words, and then I drove home in the rain, and then I waited. And the thing I was waiting for, the thing I had been waiting for my whole life, maybe, was not for my sister to apologize, or for my family to change, or for any verdict to be reversed. It was for my mother to say, I see you. It was for me to believe I deserved to be seen. If you have ever carried something for your family that they did not see, that they never acknowledged, that they described as the very thing that was wrong with you, ask yourself whether the problem was ever really you. Ask yourself who taught you that staying invisible was the cost of belonging. And then ask yourself, as I finally ask myself, what 5 words of your own have been waiting to be said?